Turkish Airlines presents Business Africa.
Hello and a warm welcome to Business Africa. I'm your host Nadia Bane. The top stories this week. With COP28 in full swing, African economies face pressing challenges as they navigate the impacts of climate change in a global landscape riddled with crisis. Year after year, the question remains the same: can Africa mitigate the multifaceted economic impacts of climate change? Kenya is among the nations subject to immense climate change impacts as the continent is being encouraged to pursue sustainable development with limited resources. Maintaining a delicate equilibrium between environmental responsibility and market competitiveness has never been harder. After a first term marked by economic growth and soaring inflation, President Felix Tshisekedi is campaigning for re-election with the promise to create more jobs. However, challenges persist in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Amidst Africa's climate challenges, developing countries are offering financial support during COP28 with a compensation fund. But are these pledges genuine contributions to foster sustainable development and combat climate change?
As COP28 unfolds, the urgent need for global collective action on climate finance takes center stage. With vast potential in renewable energy and critical resources, Africa faces challenges in transitioning to sustainable pathways. Comprising about 17% of the world's population, Africa contributes just 4% of global carbon emissions at 1.45 billion tons. Yet the continent suffers more than most from the hazards of climate change, as Kenyan President William Ruto pointed out during the convention. Dubbed the COP of Action, this year's Global Climate Summit got off to a great start. On the first day of the convention, a compensation fund for developing countries most affected by the climate crisis was announced. Nearly $655 million was pledged by the United Arab Emirates, the European Union, Germany, the United Kingdom, Japan and the United States. But Tosi Mpanu, climate negotiator for the Democratic Republic of Congo, also points out that 55 of the most vulnerable countries have already suffered $580 billion worth of damage over the past 2 decades, with alarming forecasts for the future. While this initiative is welcomed, experts insist that concrete action is needed, rather than mere declarations of intent on the part of rich countries and major polluters.
Joining us for more insights is Nancy Githaiga, Country Director at the African Wildlife Foundation. Mrs. Githaiga, welcome between us. Tell us what's at stake for Africa during COP28.
I think some good news coming from the COP, not complete because we still have 1 week or so to go. So we are hoping that things will even get better as we go along. But I think one of the biggest wins that we had on day one of this COP, was the agreement on some resources for loss and damage. I think that has been an issue that Africa has been pushing for critically. It hasn't been agreed upon for long. Actually, many nations didn't think this was important, but anyone coming from Africa, especially from our region, and seeing what is happening with the droughts and floods, knows that we cannot talk about justice when we cannot talk about loss and damage.
How can Africa lead the transition to a low-carbon future?
When we come in to these COPs, confidently and with a lot of pride that we are not those countries that have really emitted. And therefore, even what we are suffering, we are always saying, this is not of our making. But unfortunately, even if we stopped emissions today, for the next 100 years, we are still going to be in this problem. We also come to the COP and to these climate discussions, on 2 things mainly. One, the biodiversity that is in our African countries, I think is immense. And we are saying that biodiversity is also a solution to climate change. In as much as it's being impacted by climate change, it also has an opportunity to present a solution to climate change. And then number 2, and that has been mentioned a lot, by 2051, out of every 4 global citizens will be an African. So we are talking about our numbers in the next coming years. And we are also talking, thirdly, of our youthful population today. So if you look at, the youthful population, the markets we have, the opportunities for innovation, and the opportunity for Africa to actually have a different trajectory of growth. That is what we bring to the table, that our growth our economic development can take a different, can actually take a different turn, different from what other developed countries have had to go through. So that is what we bring to the table, and I think it is enough and it is sufficient for us to be on that table, not as victims, but also as people who are bringing in solutions, and that is what we are bringing in as we come for these COPs.
Should Africa favor or disregard fossil fuel economic exploitation for renewable resources?
What I think is that will not be a solution, going into more fossil fuels. But the world that has actually generated wealth, a lot of sovereign wealth, in that case, from the fossil fuels, has a duty to invest in green energies elsewhere. And this is not just about offsetting, because offsetting is not going to be the solution for climate change. Transfer your problem somewhere but continue emitting. That cannot be a solution. However, if we can still get the same level of development through renewables, then that is good for the globe. It is good for Africa as a continent. It is good for all the citizens. And I think we owe the world that are citizens of this world, and even for the generations that are coming in the future. So it's not about us exploiting our fossils, but those that have actually exploited and have acquired wealth, they also have a responsibility to invest in these other countries to ensure we have a green growth. I think that is what is good for Africa. That is what is good for the world.
Mrs. Githaiga, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Kenya is at the forefront of climate action when it has never been more needed. Suffering from climate hazards, the World Bank warns of substantial economic loss by 2050 if no action is taken.
In the Horn of Africa, Kenya is bearing the harsh effects of climate change. In the midst of floods and a historic drought, a World Bank report predicts that Kenya is at risk of a substantial economic setback, with the possibility of potentially losing up to 7.25% of its gross domestic product by 2050 due to the impact of climate change.
The biggest part would be to plan real investments for transitioning into safer, areas in energy, in infrastructure, and in other processes we are using now, because we must agree that either this world collapses or we transition into a safer, better world by taking certain deliberate steps. It might not be easy.
The vulnerable agricultural system, the main source of food and income, can no longer guarantee an adequate food supply for rural families.
And being that agriculture in this country contributes more than 20% of our GDP, and also employment, direct and indirect employment. Probably the basic is the cost of food, which has been the driver, one of the key drivers of inflation in this country, which has risen to record highs in the recent past, up to 9.5%.
Kenya has been at the forefront of climate action activities in the continent, lobbying for increased funding to developing countries to mitigate the crisis.
As the DRC gears up for a crucial election, the push for economic diversification is met with skepticism as the population suffers a two-digit inflation. Have a look.
The Democratic Republic of Congo finds itself in a formidable economic struggle, contending with a web of intricate issues. The interplay of managing heightened security spending for the armed crisis in the east, resolving salary arrears for civil servants, and mitigating the impact of the Ukrainian crisis on prices collectively burdens the nation's finances. This amalgamation of challenges manifests a significant 20% inflation rate in 2023, exacerbating difficulties in securing essential goods, education, and transportation. This inflation, influenced in part by global factors, contributes to the devaluation of the Congolese franc, impacting businesses. At the moment, what's getting on my nerves is the rise in the dollar. There are no sales. We buy bananas from suppliers at a high price because the dollar is rising. While the World Bank acknowledges GDP growth driven by mining sector, concerns arise regarding insufficient job creation to alleviate poverty. President Felix Tshisekedi's endeavor to diversify the economy, including plans for a battery factory, and counter skepticism due to power cuts, limited manufacturing expertise, and corruption. And who did the President of the Republic get involved with? He has worked with people who have also destroyed this country. They are in key positions. And what should have been done was to wipe out the political class so that the fight against corruption could be properly waged. In navigating these several challenges, the DRC stands at a critical juncture, with economic concerns playing a pivotal role in shaping the nation's political landscape. The upcoming elections will provide a crucial litmus test for the government's ability to address these issues and steer the country towards sustained economic stability.
Thank you for tuning into Business Africa. I've been your host, Nadia Bane. For more business stories and news, stay tuned to Africanews and Africanews.com.
Business Africa was presented by Turkish Airlines.